Sometimes, a simple joke can uncover a story no one expected. When a respected Navy admiral challenged a quiet single-dad janitor to spar for fun, everyone on base laughed until the moment he moved. What followed stunned the entire command and revealed a truth buried deep beneath rank medals and time itself. If stories of courage, kindness, and redemption speak to your heart, we'd be honored to have you with us. Subscribe to our channel and stay a while, because sometimes the smallest acts of humility can reveal the greatest heroes. The morning light over Norfolk Naval Base carried a certain stillness, an echo of discipline and memory that lingered long after the reveille had faded. The metallic scent of salt water drifted in from the docks, mixing with the faint tang of disinfectant and floor wax inside the training hall. It was the kind of morning that went unnoticed by most. But to Daniel Cross, it was sacred. He guided the mop in long, patient strokes, his movements steady and quiet. The gray-green of his worn fatigues blended with the floor tiles. To an onlooker, he was just another janitor starting another shift. But the precision in his rhythm, each motion deliberate, measured, hinted at someone who once moved with purpose, far beyond a mop and bucket. "Daddy, I made the bear sit," a small voice broke the quiet. Ava, his 6-year-old daughter, sat cross-legged by the bench, with her faded teddy bear propped upright like a proud soldier. She beamed at her father as if she'd just commanded a battalion. Daniel smiled. "Good work, Captain Ava. Make sure he keeps his posture straight." The little girl saluted with all the seriousness her small frame could muster. Around them, the cavernous training room waited for the day's drills, rows of mats, punching bags, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. At that hour, the place belonged to them alone. For Daniel, those few minutes before the first recruits arrived were the calmest part of the day before laughter, shouts, and memories began to blur. He wrung out the mop, his mind slipping as it often did to the sea. The helicopter's spinning blades, the weight of the harness, the voice on the radio crying for help. Then the explosion. Then, nothing. He blinked, drew a breath, and grounded himself again in the soft squeak of the mop. "Morning, Cross." The voice came sharp, authoritative, and unmistakably female. Daniel looked up. Admiral Amelia Drake stepped into the room, her white uniform immaculate, the light catching on the medals lined neatly on her chest. Her posture was the embodiment of order, every thread, every crease deliberate. Behind her followed a few officers, all carrying that mix of pride and mild tension that accompanied her presence. "Good morning," Admiral Daniel said, quietly setting his mop aside. She gave a brief nod. "You're early as usual. Habit?" He replied, offering a faint, polite smile. Ava peeked from behind the bucket, clutching her teddy bear. Amelia noticed her and softened slightly. "And who might this officer be?" Ava's voice came shy but firm. "Ava Cross, ma'am. Pleasure to meet you, Ava," Amelia said, kneeling a little to her height. "Your dad's been keeping this place spotless." Ava's grin widened. "He says clean floors help people stand taller." Amelia chuckled, a rare sound from someone the younger sailors jokingly referred to as the Ice Admiral. That sounds like something a good leader would say. As she stood, her gaze lingered on Daniel for a moment longer than expected. There was something about the way he stood. Shoulders relaxed, but ready eyes calm, yet aware of every movement in the room that tugged faintly at her memory. For an instant, she saw not a janitor, but a silhouette framed against the storm, a voice that once spoke through static. Then it was gone. "Carry on, Mr. Cross," she said, breaking the thought. "Yes, ma'am." She moved on, instructing the officers who followed her. Daniel returned to his mop, though his eyes trailed her for a moment. He'd seen admirals before, dozens of them, but Amelia Drake carried something different, a weight beneath the composure, a quiet grief she didn't let the world see. He knew that kind of grief well. By mid-morning, the room was alive with motion. Soldiers training boots, thudding against mats, bursts of laughter between sparring sessions. Daniel kept to the side, cleaning up checking supplies, making himself invisible. Yet invisibility had its advantages. You saw what others didn't. He noticed how Amelia moved through her team, not just commanding, but observing, correcting with precision and rare empathy. Beneath the iron discipline, she cared deeply, though she'd never admit it aloud. When the laughter rose too high, Ava covered her ears and giggled. Daniel crouched beside her. "It's just noise, sweetheart. They're practicing being strong, like you." He paused, caught off guard. Maybe once. She studied him for a moment, then nodded as if confirming a secret. "You're still strong." That small, unshakable faith in her father made something tighten in his chest. He brushed a hand through her hair and smiled. Across the room, Amelia turned just in time to see the exchange. The way Daniel's eyes softened, the kind of tenderness rare on a military base. And once again that faint flicker of recognition stirred in her chest, though she couldn't place it. As she passed near him later, she paused, gesturing at the gleaming floor. "You've done good work here, Cross. Thank you, Admiral." Then, with the faintest hint of humor, something unusual in her tone, she added, "Don't make it too clean. My recruits might start slipping." He allowed himself a quiet laugh. "I'll keep that in mind." For the first time that day, she smiled, not the polite, controlled curve she wore for public appearances, but a genuine, fleeting smile. As she turned to leave, Daniel caught her looking at him once more, this time with a trace of curiosity in her eyes. When the room finally emptied, he leaned on his mop, watching sunlight stretch across the tiles. Ava had fallen asleep on the bench, her teddy bear still in her arms. He whispered to himself, "Easy day, kiddo." But deep down, he knew peace on a base like this never lasted long. Somewhere beyond the hum of drills and the ocean wind, fate was already stirring quietly, setting the stage for the moment when the janitor would be called out not to clean, but to stand. The kind of moment that changes everything. By the next morning, the training hall pulsed with energy. The faint smell of sweat leather and disinfectant mixed into that unmistakable military perfume, a scent of discipline and human will. The early drills had ended, but laughter lingered. A handful of young sailors stayed behind, testing their strength on the mats, teasing one another with playful jabs and mock bravado. Admiral Amelia Drake stood at the edge of the floor, her white uniform replaced by a crisp, training-jai black belt tied neatly around her waist. Her posture was impeccable. Chin-high shoulders squared the presence of command intact, even when her shoes were off. "All right, boys," she said, with a wry smile. "Who's next?" The sailors exchanged hesitant glances. None dared to step forward. Everyone on base knew Amelia Drake's reputation. Behind the medals and the composure lay years of combat training, martial arts survival tactics, rescue ops. Sparring with her wasn't an invitation. It was a dare. "Come on," she teased. "Surely one of you wants the honor of losing gracefully." The room broke into laughter. Someone muttered, "Not me, ma'am. I've still got ribs that remember last time." Amelia grinned, letting the laughter swell before turning her gaze toward the far side of the room, toward the quiet man mopping near the corner. Daniel Cross, dressed in his olive fatigues and faded apron, moved methodically as always. He was wiping down the mats after the last round, careful to keep Ava, who sat cross-legged nearby, out of the way. "Hey, Janitor," Amelia called out, her tone light, but unmistakably commanding. "Is that floor clean enough, or do you need a test run to see if it's slip-proof?" The room erupted again. Laughter echoed, boots shuffled, and a few sailors nudged each other. Daniel stopped mid-swipe. Slowly, he looked up, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am, I wouldn't want to interfere with training, Her eyes sparkled with challenge. "I'm offering you a chance to show off your mop skills in hand-to-hand form. For fun." "For fun," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Yes," she said. "For fun." Ava tilted her head, clutching her teddy bear tighter. She didn't like the laughter. "Daddy," she whispered. Daniel crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's all right, sweetheart. The Admiral's just joking." But as he rose, the sound of the sailor's laughter changed, less friendly. Now, edging toward mockery. Someone whispered too loudly, "Guess the janitor's afraid to wrinkle his apron." That did it. The laughter that followed filled the room, bouncing off the walls like ricochets. Amelia's expression stiffened. She hadn't meant to humiliate him. It was supposed to be lighthearted, a spontaneous moment of levity among her crew. But she realized too late how it looked a superior officer calling out a civilian worker in front of an audience. Daniel met her gaze. There was no resentment there, just calm, quiet dignity. He set the mop against the wall and rolled his sleeves up. "If it's for fun, Admiral," he said evenly, "then let's make sure no one gets hurt." The laughter stopped. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Even Amelia's composure faltered for half a second before she caught herself. "Very well," she said, hiding her curiosity behind a thin smile. "We'll keep it light." She stepped onto the mat. The others backed away, forming a loose circle. Ava watched from the bench, small fingers twisting around her bear's paw. Daniel stood across from Amelia, hands relaxed at his sides. There was nothing in his stance that spoke of challenge, no posturing, no bravado, just stillness. "Ever trained before?" she asked, half teasing. "A little," he said. "What style?" He paused, then replied softly. "The kind that tries not to leave scars." Something in the way he said it made the air shift. The sailors exchanged puzzled looks. Amelia frowned slightly, then nodded. "All right, Janitor," she said. "Show me what you've got." She moved first, a sharp step forward. Quick jab, meant to test his reflexes. He sidestepped neatly, not countering, not even flinching. Just watching. Her second strike came faster. Again, he slipped aside as if he'd known it was coming. The room grew quieter. The laughter had drained away, replaced by a growing curiosity. Amelia adjusted her stance. "You're quick," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "You're holding back." For a moment she saw it, the calm confidence in his eyes. Not arrogance, not defiance, something deeper, familiar. She exhaled slowly. "Let's see how you handle this." Her next sequence came fast. A roundhouse kick followed by a sweep, then a pivoting arm strike. Each one executed with the fluid precision of a master. Each one missed by an inch. Daniel didn't block, didn't strike back. He simply wasn't there when the blows arrived. The sailors stood frozen. Finally, she stopped breathing lightly, hands still raised. "You're not even trying," she said. Daniel looked at her quietly. "You asked for fun, not a fight." A murmur rippled through the room. Ava, still watching from the corner, clapped once, softly, proudly. "That's my daddy." Amelia blinked, her composure cracking for a heartbeat. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a real laugh, bright and full. "All right, Cross," she said, shaking her head. "You win this round." He nodded once and reached for his mop again, as if nothing had happened. The sailors, unsure what to say, stepped aside as he passed. Amelia stood alone on the mat for a moment, staring after him. There was something about his movements, graceful, measured, controlled, that nagged at her memory. A soldier. Not just that. A pilot, maybe. She couldn't quite place it, but a thought flickered in the back of her mind. Where have I seen that kind of calm before? As Daniel knelt to gather his bucket, Ava hugged him tightly. "You did good, Daddy," he smiled. The Admiral was just having fun. "She likes you," Ava said with innocent certainty. Daniel chuckled softly. That's not how it works, sweetheart. But as he looked back across the room, where Amelia Drake was still standing, arms crossed, expression thoughtful, he wasn't entirely sure she'd been joking. Outside, the afternoon sun burned gold over the base. Inside, something small but significant had shifted. For the first time, the Admiral's laughter had turned to silence. And silence, Daniel knew, always came before the storm. Night had settled over Norfolk, heavy and windless. The ocean beyond the base murmured like an old memory, steady and low, as if whispering names to the dark. Inside the training facility, the fluorescent lights had been dimmed, leaving behind only a faint hum and the echo of the day's laughter fading into silence. Amelia Drake lingered at her desk long after most of her officers had gone. Her office window overlooked the harbor rows of ships, glinting beneath the moonlight, proud and silent sentinels. She should have been reviewing tomorrow's logistics or reports from the Atlantic Fleet inspection. Instead, her eyes kept drifting to the black and white photograph pinned to her wall. A rescue helicopter caught mid-hover, the waves below erupting in foam and fire. It was dated 12 years ago. Operation Huron Storm. Her throat tightened at the memory, the heat, the chaos, the screaming wind, and the smoke thick enough to taste. She'd been a junior officer, then trapped in the belly of a transport chopper going down off the Carolina coast. The explosion had torn through the fuselage. Flames. Panic. She remembered shouting coordinates through the radio, her voice hoarse with fear. Then another voice cutting through the static. Calm, steady, unmistakably American. "Hold on, Bluebird 2. We see you. I'm coming in." No name, just a call sign she'd never forget. The pilot who flew into that storm had saved 6 of them, then vanished from the Navy records entirely. Some said he'd been injured beyond recovery. Others claimed he'd broken protocol. The truth was lost to bureaucracy and silence. Amelia leaned back, exhaling slowly. The way Daniel Cross had moved earlier that day, the control, the grace under pressure, had stirred something deep, something she hadn't felt in years. Don't be ridiculous, she told herself. A janitor can't be him, and yet when she'd looked into his eyes, she'd seen it the same calm certainty she'd once heard through a headset above the roar of dying engines. She rubbed her temple, frustrated. The Navy trained you to trust facts, not feelings. But sometimes ghosts refused to stay buried. Across the base, in a small maintenance shed tucked behind the gym, Daniel sat alone with a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Ava had long since fallen asleep in the little cot behind him, clutching her teddy bear. The faint glow of the desk lamp haloed her small face, peaceful, untouched by the noise of the world. Daniel stared at the mop, leaning against the wall, then down at his hands, scarred, steady, the hands of a man who'd once flown through hell and back. He hadn't meant to draw attention today. He never did. For years he'd worked to erase the soldier he used to be. The Navy Cross he'd been awarded sat in a shoebox somewhere, buried under old letters and photographs. He didn't clean floors because he had to. He cleaned because it gave him peace order and something quiet enough to drown out the past. But when Admiral Drake had called him out, when those recruits had laughed, it had stirred something he thought he'd buried. Instinct. Pride. Muscle memory older than pain. He closed his eyes and let the images come. The fireball, the mayday, the terrified voices on the radio, the rescue harness slamming against his shoulder, the helicopter spinning, the bright flash and the silence afterward. He still remembered her voice. The young officer in the doomed chopper. She'd been the last one he pulled from the wreck, and the last voice he heard before the cockpit went black. Her words had been barely a whisper through the static. "Whoever you are, thank you." When he woke up in the hospital weeks later, she was gone. The reports listed her among the survivors. That was enough for him. He'd left the Navy soon after, unable to fly again. His back never fully healed his soul, even less so. The medals, the commendations, none of it mattered. What haunted him wasn't the crash. It was the friend he couldn't save that night, co-pilot Jason Reed, who'd burned trying to buy them time. I still owe you, Brother Daniel thought, and maybe this quiet life is how I pay it back. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing him. The next day dawned gray and windy. Daniel arrived early again, setting up his tools, while Ava colored at the corner table with crayons someone from the mess hall had given her. He worked in silence, his mind still replaying the Admiral's laughter, the way it had faltered when she saw him move. He didn't want to be noticed. Attention was dangerous. Attention meant questions. But fate had a way of circling back. The door opened sharply. Amelia Drake entered crisp and composed, flanked by 2 officers. Her presence filled the space like the sound of a starting bell. "Morning, Mr. Cross," she said. He nodded politely. "Morning, Admiral." She hesitated. "I hope I didn't embarrass you yesterday." He looked up, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. "Not at all, ma'am. You gave my daughter quite the story to tell." Ava beamed. Daddy was like whoosh, and everyone was like whoa. The sailors behind her chuckled. Even Amelia smiled, though faintly. Seems she remembers it better than we do. As they spoke, a training alarm sounded in the distance, one of those periodic drills meant to keep the unit sharp. The sound triggered something deep in Daniel's chest, the whine of engines, the call of Mayday, the echo of fear. His breath caught, but he hid it behind a calm exterior. Amelia noticed the flicker in his eyes. Instinct told her she'd seen that expression before, somewhere between composure and memory, the look of someone who'd stared at death and learned not to blink. When she left the hall, she couldn't shake the thought. That night, she searched her personal archive, a classified database of service records, accessible only to flag officers. The glow of the computer lit the dark room. She typed, "Daniel Cross." The results were sparse at first: civilian contractor base maintenance staff, Norfolk, employed 4 years. Then she scrolled further. Hidden behind an encrypted file tag was a single line of text marked restricted. Former service. Her fingers hovered. She entered her clearance code. A moment later, the screen shifted. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Cross call. Sign Huron Hawk. Decorations. Navy Cross Distinguished Flying Cross Humanitarian Service Medal. Status honorably discharged. Medical. Mission record operation Huron Storm, classified. Amelia froze. Her breath hitched. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Huron Storm. The same operation. The same storm. She leaned back in her chair, eyes wide, heart pounding. Her hands trembled as she whispered to the empty room. "It's him, the janitor, the man with the quiet eyes, the one who saved her life." Outside her window, the waves beat against the dock pylons, steady as a heartbeat. In the maintenance shed across the base, Daniel stirred in his sleep, haunted by the same sound. 2 souls, once bound by a storm, now walking the same corridors without knowing what awaited them. And somewhere deep in the silence of the base, destiny began to stir again softly, like the first rumble before thunder. The morning after her discovery, Admiral Amelia Drake moved through the base with her usual precision, but her mind was far from still. Every salute, every report, every clipboard handed to her blurred into background noise. Beneath her calm exterior, she was trying to reconcile 2 impossible truths. The man who mopped the gym floors was the same man who had once flown into a wall of fire to save her life. She had read every line of his classified file twice. The commendations, the citations, the medical discharge report. The words "spinal compression, unfit for further flight," had hit her like a blow. But what struck her even more was the silence that followed: no further service, no reintegration, no reassignment. The hero of Huron Storm had vanished into civilian life without ceremony or farewell. Now he worked down the hall from her office, cleaning floors, raising a little girl alone. She wanted to speak to him to thank him properly, to ask why, but part of her, the disciplined, career-bound officer, hesitated. What would she even say? That she'd only realized after 12 years that the man who risked his life for hers was mopping her corridor, that she'd laughed at him in front of her own sailors. Duty demanded she remain composed. Emotion had no place in command. Yet as she walked past the training hall, her steps slowed involuntarily. Daniel was there, as always, polishing the mat edges, while Ava arranged a row of tiny plastic soldiers along the windowsill. The morning light caught the faint lines on his face, the quiet strength in his posture. He didn't see her at first. When he finally looked up, their eyes met. "Morning, Admiral," he said, his voice calm, respectful. "Good morning," she replied, masking the nervous flutter in her chest. "Looks like the place is already spotless." "Almost," he said. "Dust has a way of coming back. Like old memories." Her heart skipped a beat. Old memories. The phrase hit too close. She forced a small smile. "We'll try not to make your job harder," he shrugged lightly. "I don't mind a little work. Keeps my mind clear." Before she could answer, Lieutenant Carter, her energetic young aide, jogged into the hall, holding a set of training gloves. "Ma'am, your sparring team's ready for warm-up." Amelia blinked. "Already I thought we were yes, ma'am. The schedule's been adjusted for the Admiral's motivation session," Carter said with a grin. The team's itching to test their reflexes after yesterday's entertainment. Ava giggled softly, clutching her bear. Daniel looked at Amelia, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Sounds like you've started a trend." Amelia rolled her eyes, a rare human gesture. "Apparently so. I may have created a monster." As Carter helped her secure her gloves, she turned to the sailors, forming a loose circle on the mat. "All right, people. Let's keep it light today. We're practicing defense, not destruction." That earned a few nervous laughs. Daniel began collecting cleaning supplies, intending to step aside. But one of the younger sailors, a broad-shouldered corporal named Ellis, called out, "Hey, Admiral, how about a rematch with your janitor? He gave us quite a show yesterday." A chorus of agreement followed. Even Carter grinned. "Come on, ma'am, it'd make for good morale." Amelia hesitated. Her instinct was to shut it down. But when she saw the faint smile on Daniel's face, amused, almost teasing, something shifted inside her. "All right," she said. Finally, her tone firm but playful. "If Mr. Cross doesn't mind." Daniel set down his bucket and stepped forward. "If it's for morale, I'd hate to disappoint." The sailors cheered. Ava clapped happily. As they faced each other again on the mat, the energy in the room changed. It wasn't the awkward humor of yesterday. This time there was something unspoken between them. Awareness, respect, curiosity. Amelia adjusted her stance. "We'll keep it short," she said. Daniel nodded. "Short's good." The first move came from her. Quick, precise, a feint jab followed by a side kick. He parried effortlessly, his movement smooth as water. The sailors watched in silence, their excitement dampened by the strange grace unfolding before them. Amelia circled sweat forming lightly along her brow. "You're not an amateur," she said between breaths. He smiled faintly. "And you're not easy to read." She attacked again, faster, sharper. He countered, but this time he let his forearm brush lightly against hers, guiding her momentum aside. The contact was brief, but it jolted her. His reflexes, his composure unmistakable. Something inside her confirmed what the file had already told her. This was no janitor. This was the same man who had flown through hell. She took a breath, stepped back, and tried one last strike. A sweep meant to test his balance. He anticipated it perfectly. Sidestepped, and instead of countering, he rested 2 fingers gently against her wrist, a gesture more teaching than taunting. "Admiral," he said softly. "Sometimes defense isn't about blocking. It's about knowing when to stop." Silence filled the room. For a moment, neither moved. The soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether they'd just witnessed victory or surrender. Amelia looked up at him, breath shallow, and something like humility passed through her eyes. She lowered her stance slowly, then bowed. Lesson received. Daniel nodded, stepping back. "Thank you, ma'am." Ava's small voice broke the silence. "You're both really good." Laughter rippled through the hall, easing the tension. Carter clapped his hands. "Well, that's one for the history books. The Admiral and the Janitor best sparring match this base has seen." As everyone began dispersing, Amelia stood still, watching Daniel pack up his things. There was a serenity to him, the kind of peace only earned through surviving chaos. She felt something stir inside her, half admiration, half guilt. When he walked past her, she said quietly, "You move like someone who's done this before." He met her gaze evenly, maybe in another life. Then he was gone, leaving her alone on the mat. Later that night, as Amelia reviewed the day's reports, her reflection stared back at her from the window. Uniform, perfect medals, gleaming eyes tired. She thought about the man in the maintenance shed, the little girl, who colored by his side the way he'd said another life. What haunted her most wasn't the mystery of who he was. It was the quiet grace of how he'd accepted who he'd become. And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet grace would soon test every belief she had about honor healing and the true meaning of strength. Outside, the wind began to rise faint at first, but steady, as if somewhere out at sea, a storm was waking again. The following morning arrived gray, and still the kind of overcast quiet that seemed to press against the windows and dull every sound. On the Norfolk base, routine ruled all things: revel at dawn, drills by 7, reports by 9. But something felt different that day. Even the chatter in the mess hall seemed cautious, subdued, as though the entire base was holding its breath. It started with whispers, the kind that ripple across barracks and hallways, passed in low voices over coffee and laughter that never quite reached the eyes. The janitor took on the Admiral. She couldn't land a single hit. He moved like he'd done this before. By the time Amelia Drake walked across the parade ground, she could feel it, the eyes that lingered too long, the half-suppressed grins. No one dared to say anything to her face, of course. She was still the Admiral. But soldiers have a way of talking without words. She didn't blame them. Yesterday's spar had been unexpected. What was supposed to be a harmless morale exercise had turned into something else entirely, a quiet revelation she hadn't meant to have. Amelia had seen hundreds of fighters in her career. Some were fast, some were strong. But what she'd witnessed in Daniel Cross wasn't power, it was control. The kind of control born from discipline so deep it rewires the soul. He had moved with the patience of a man who knew every possible mistake and refused to make any. And he hadn't struck her once. Now, sitting in her office with a mug of black coffee gone cold, she replayed that moment, his 2 fingers resting lightly on her wrist, his calm voice. Sometimes defense isn't about blocking. It's about knowing when to stop. That line hadn't come from a janitor. It came from a man who had seen too much, who had learned restraint the hard way. A knock at the door pulled her from thought. Enter. Lieutenant Carter stepped in, a hesitant smile on his face. "Morning, Admiral. I brought the updated readiness reports. And, the gossip." Amelia arched an eyebrow. "The gossip, yes, ma'am. The crew's convinced Mr. Cross was some kind of Black Ops instructor or retired SEAL. One guy swears he saw him handle a mop like a sword." Amelia's lips twitched. "That sounds like a security hazard." Carter grinned, then sobered. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." She nodded. "I think they respect him," Carter said quietly. "They joke, sure, but after what they saw, it's not mockery. It's admiration. The kind we don't see much anymore." Amelia leaned back, thoughtful. Respect doesn't always wear rank, Lieutenant. Sometimes it just shows up with a bucket and a steady hand. Carter chuckled, saluted, and left. When the door closed, Amelia stared at the Navy Cross medal displayed on her shelf. The irony wasn't lost on her. The real bearer of such courage was probably sweeping the hallway outside her office. Meanwhile, Daniel worked in silence. The day after the Spar, his routine had returned. Mop, polish, repair, repeat. But the air around him had changed. Soldiers who once barely noticed him now greeted him with cautious respect. A few even offered to carry his supplies. He thanked them politely but kept his head down. The last thing he wanted was attention. Ava noticed the difference, of course. "Daddy," she said, as they walked down the corridor, her small hand gripping as everyone's smiling at you today. "Maybe they're just happy it's Friday," he replied. She shook her head. "No, it's because they know you're strong." He smiled faintly. "Strong doesn't always mean fighting, kiddo." "Then what does it mean?" He thought for a moment. "It means staying kind, even when it's hard." That seemed to satisfy her. She skipped ahead, humming a tune she'd made up about heroes and teddy bears. As Daniel watched her, something tightened in his chest, a mix of pride and ache. He'd promised himself never to be drawn back into the world he'd left. He was done, proving himself done with medals and missions. The janitor's life wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. For him, for her. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that peace was never meant to last. That afternoon, Amelia's unit gathered again for a routine close-quarters combat demonstration. She hadn't intended for Daniel to be there, but fate or the base's relentless schedule had other plans. He was cleaning near the corner of the room when one of the instructors asked for a volunteer. "Admiral," the instructor said, "would you care to demonstrate the defensive stance from yesterday's lesson?" The room chuckled softly. Amelia sighed. "You all never let anything go, do you?" Then her eyes found Daniel. He was leaning lightly against the wall, mop in hand, watching without expression. Their gazes met. "Mr. Cross," she said before she could stop herself care to assist. The sailors froze. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If you insist, Admiral." The instructor stepped aside as Daniel joined her on the mat. There was no laughter this time, just quiet anticipation. "Let's start simple," Amelia said, raising her hands. Daniel mirrored her stance, though his movements were relaxed, almost reluctant. She attacked a short elbow strike. He sidestepped effortlessly. A palm strike, another dodge. Every move she made he read like a book, countering with minimal effort. "Don't hold back, Admiral," someone murmured. Amelia's jaw tightened. She launched a faster sequence, 3 strikes, 1 kick. Daniel deflected each with almost lazy precision. When she tried a sweep, he caught her wrist mid-motion, holding it gently but firmly. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then his voice, low and steady. "The hardest part of discipline is restraint." She looked up into his eyes, seeing not arrogance, but compassion. He released her wrist and stepped back. Silence filled the room. Then from the back, one of the younger sailors began to clap. Another joined. Soon the hall echoed with applause, not for victory, but for understanding. Amelia stood there, chest rising and falling, her mind spinning. She'd just been reminded of something she'd almost forgotten, that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it stood quietly in a janitor's shoes and refused to strike. When the training ended, she found him outside wiping down the railing in the corridor. "You didn't have to go easy on me," she said softly. Daniel smiled without looking up. "I wasn't going easy. You were holding back, too." "Maybe I was." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the bass filling the space between them. Finally, she said, "You have a strange way of teaching, Mr. Cross." He glanced at her eyes, warm but distant. "I used to believe fighting proved strength. Then I learned that sometimes walking away takes more." Her breath caught at the quiet wisdom in his tone. Before she could answer, Ava ran up, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, I drew you and the Admiral." She held up a crayon picture, two stick figures bowing to each other under a big yellow sun. Amelia smiled. "That's beautiful, Ava." Daniel looked at the drawing for a long moment, something unreadable passing over his face. "Yeah," he murmured. "It really is." As the child skipped ahead, Amelia found herself watching him again, not as a janitor, not even as the man who once saved her life, but as someone who embodied the very thing she'd spent her career preaching, yet rarely practiced grace under fire. And though neither of them said it, they both knew this peace between them was fragile, too still, too quiet, the kind of silence that always comes before a storm. The rain began before dawn, soft at first, just a whisper against the hangar roofs, then steady, relentless, a curtain of gray that blurred the entire base into watercolor. The Norfolk air smelled of salt and metal and memory. Most of the base still slept, but one light burned alone in the administrative wing, Admiral Amelia Drake's office. She hadn't gone home. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what she'd read. The classified records still glowed on her monitor, the Navy Cross emblem etched at the top. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Cross, hero of Operation Huron Storm, the man whose voice had once guided her through fire, the man who was supposed to have disappeared. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, replaying his words from yesterday. The hardest part of discipline is restraint. Now it all made sense, the poise, the calm, the haunted stillness in his eyes, the way he'd known exactly when to stop. But what haunted her most wasn't the discovery. It was the realization that she'd humiliated him. Twice. Amelia exhaled and leaned back, staring at the rain streaking down the window. It was absurd, an admiral losing sleep over a janitor. But Daniel Cross wasn't a janitor. He was a legend the Navy had quietly forgotten. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, he scrubbed her floors while she signed memos under his forgotten medal. A pang of guilt twisted in her chest. How many others had she walked past in her career, not seeing the stories behind their eyes? How many quiet heroes lived among the ranks, unseen, unacknowledged? Her reflection in the glass looked back at her cold, composed, lonely. She whispered to the rain, "You saved my life, and I didn't even recognize you." Down the corridor, Daniel arrived early as usual, the rhythmic squeak of his boots marking his quiet procession through the hallways. Ava skipped beside him in her red raincoat, humming a tune, her teddy bear tucked beneath one arm. "Careful on the steps, sweetheart," he said gently. "Yes, Daddy." She hopped over a puddle with exaggerated precision, then looked up at him, her face glowing. "Are we still getting pancakes at the diner later?" He smiled. "If we finish early, maybe." Yay. He envied her simplicity, the way she lived entirely in the present. The past didn't haunt her. The future didn't scare her. Every day was just another adventure. As they entered the maintenance wing, a familiar voice echoed from behind. "Mr. Cross." Daniel turned. Admiral Drake stood at the end of the hallway, umbrella in one hand, her expression unreadable. He straightened instinctively. "Morning, Admiral. I'd like a word if you have a moment." Ava looked up. "Are you in trouble?" Daddy Amelia's features softened. "Not at all, Ava. I just need to borrow him for a little while." Ava nodded solemnly. "Okay." But he gets nervous when people yell. Daniel stifled a chuckle. "I'll be fine, kiddo. Go color by the front desk for a bit." Once Ava was out of earshot, Amelia gestured toward her office. "This way, please." Inside, the air was still, except for the patter of rain on the windows. Daniel removed his cap, waiting quietly. Amelia stood behind her desk, then finally looked up at him, not as a superior officer, but as a woman carrying the weight of 12 lost years. "I found your file," she said softly. Daniel froze. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent light above them. She continued, her voice low but steady. "Lieutenant Commander Daniel Cross, Navy Cross recipient, rescue pilot Huron Storm 2010. She drew a trembling breath. "You saved my unit that night. You saved me." He closed his eyes. That was a long time ago, but not long enough for me to forget the voice that told me to hold on. Silence hung between them like fog. Finally, he spoke. I didn't think anyone from that night was still around. "I was," she said, her voice breaking. "And I should have remembered you. I should have looked for you." "You had a career to build," he replied gently, "and I had a promise to keep." Her brow furrowed. "A promise." He hesitated, eyes drifting toward the rain-slick window. "To my co-pilot. He didn't make it out. I told him I'd make sure no one else went down on my watch. After I healed, I thought maybe keeping this base clean was my way of keeping that promise. The simplicity of it, the humility made her chest ache. She stepped closer. "Daniel, why didn't you ever come back? The Navy would have found a place for you." He gave a quiet laugh. "A place, maybe. But not peace. I'd had enough noise for one lifetime." She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to admit. "You were the calm in the storm that night. I remember thinking whoever that pilot was, he didn't sound human. Just steady. Like he'd already made peace with whatever came next." "I hadn't," he said. "But I had something to fight for." "You all did." Their eyes met, then two soldiers from the same storm, finally standing face to face. Amelia swallowed hard. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything, Admiral. You made it out." "That's payment enough." She shook her head. "No, that's not enough." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain grew heavier, drumming against the glass like a heartbeat. Finally, she said, "There's a ceremony next week for distinguished service. I could—" "No," he interrupted gently. "Please. No speeches. No spotlight. I'm where I belong." Her throat tightened. "You belong in uniform." He smiled faintly. "Uniforms don't make heroes, Admiral." Those words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Amelia blinked back tears she hadn't expected to fall. She turned away, composing herself, then said softly, "At least allow me to thank you properly. A cup of coffee, perhaps," he considered it. "Only if I can bring my daughter. She's the real commanding officer in our house." Amelia laughed through her tears, the sound light and fragile. Then it settled. When Daniel left her office, the rain had eased. He found Ava asleep on a chair, her coloring book open across her lap. He lifted her gently into his arms, kissed her forehead, and walked into the quiet morning. Amelia stood by her window watching him go. The janitor's gait was steady, unhurried, yet to her, it carried the weight of everything she'd ever admired about the Navy. Courage, grace, purpose without pride. For years, she'd told her officers that honor was earned in battle. Now she knew better. Sometimes honor simply meant showing up every day and doing good quietly. She whispered into the empty room, "Thank you, Daniel Cross." Outside, the storm began to clear. The first rays of light broke through the clouds, streaking the wet pavement with gold, like the first sign of redemption finding its way home. The rain had passed, leaving behind a morning that smelled of salt and sunlight. A thin mist rolled across the Norfolk harbor as gulls wheeled lazily above the cranes. The base stirred awake. Boots on gravel, laughter over breakfast, the metallic clatter of day-to-day service. Daniel Cross was already at work, pushing his mop down the corridor near the hangar bay. He moved with his usual quiet rhythm, but his mind wasn't entirely on the floor. His conversation with Admiral Amelia Drake the day before still echoed in his thoughts. He hadn't expected her to find out. He certainly hadn't expected her to care. 12 years of silence had built walls he never thought anyone would try to climb again. But the look in her eyes, equal parts. Regret and recognition had broken something loose inside him. He'd lain awake the night before, listening to Ava's soft breathing, staring at the ceiling of their small base apartment. He told himself the past didn't matter, that the Navy Cross collecting dust in a shoebox didn't matter. But now he wasn't sure. Maybe for the first time in years, he wanted to be seen again. "Excuse me, Mr. Cross." The voice was gentle, familiar. He looked up. Admiral Drake stood at the far end of the hall out of uniform, this time dressed simply in slacks and a gray sweater, her hair tied back, the sharp edges of command softened by morning light. In her hands were 2 steaming cups of coffee. He straightened instinctively. "Admiral." "Daniel," she said, cutting him off with a small smile. "Just Amelia today." He hesitated. That might take some getting used to. She offered one of the cups. "Then let's start with this." He accepted it carefully, the paper cup warm against his scarred hands. "I appreciate it, Ma'am Amelia." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, while the sound of the bass carried faintly from outside distant commands, a gull's cry, the hum of the morning drills. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you an apology, for a lot of things." He met her eyes. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," she insisted softly. "For not recognizing you, for calling you out in front of my men, for letting them laugh. You deserved better than that." He shook his head. "Respect's not a thing people owe me, Admiral. It's something you earn every day. Then you've been earning it quietly for years." There was no flattery in her tone, only truth. It made him uncomfortable. He tried to deflect. "I'm just doing my job." "No," she said. "You've been doing far more than that. You've been teaching this base more about dignity than half the officers combined." He looked away, uncertain how to respond. From the corner of the hall, a small voice interrupted them. Daddy Ava came running, her rain boots squeaking, holding up a drawing. "Look, I made this for the Admiral." Amelia knelt to meet her at eye level. "Can I see?" The little girl nodded eagerly. The drawing was a swirl of bright colors, a tall woman in white next to a man in green, with a little red figure between them, holding both their hands. Above their heads in a shaky crayon scrawl it read, "Heroes don't wear the same clothes." Amelia blinked. For a moment words failed her. Then she said softly, "This might be the most beautiful thing I've ever been given." Ava grinned. "Daddy says heroes can look like anyone, even janitors." Daniel chuckled, embarrassed. "She listens too closely sometimes." Amelia smiled warmly at the child. "Your father's right, you know. And very wise." Ava preened at the praise. "Daddy's the best. I don't doubt it." Daniel crouched down beside his daughter. "Go show this to Lieutenant Carter, kiddo. I think he's secretly jealous of your art skills." Ava giggled and dashed off, leaving the 2 adults standing in the soft echo of her laughter. Amelia exhaled. "She's wonderful. She's my reason for everything," he said quietly. Their eyes met again, and for the first time, Amelia saw beyond his calm exterior the exhaustion, the years of carrying too much alone. Yet beneath it all, there was peace. The kind that didn't come from victory, but from survival. She sipped her coffee, searching for the right words. "You know, I used to think leadership was about control, keeping people in line, keeping emotion out of the equation. But lately..." She glanced toward the door where Ava had disappeared. "I'm starting to realize that compassion might be the highest form of command." Daniel smiled faintly. Took me a long time to learn that lesson, too. There was a pause filled with the kind of quiet that didn't demand to be broken. Then, without thinking, Amelia asked, "Do you ever miss it?" "Flying." He stared into his coffee. "Every day. But the truth is, I don't miss the sky as much as I miss the purpose." "You still have it," she said. He looked up, skeptical. "You keep this place running. You keep these people grounded. You're more of a leader now than half the ones in uniform." He studied her face, earnest, unguarded, and for the first time he believed she meant it. Something softened between them. The air seemed warmer, the walls less sterile. Amelia glanced down at her watch reluctantly. "I have to head to the docks for a briefing. But thank you, Daniel, for the coffee, for the lesson." He chuckled. "I think you brought the coffee, Admiral." "Maybe. But you brought the perspective." She started to walk away, then turned back. "If Ava's free tomorrow, there's a family event at the officers' hall. Movies, games, that sort of thing. You're both welcome." Daniel hesitated. "That's kind of your crowd, isn't it?" "My crowd could use a bit more humility," she said with a wink. "Bring her." Before he could answer, she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hall. He stood there for a long moment, holding his now empty cup. A faint smile played on his lips. When Ava returned, tugging at his sleeve, she asked, "Was the Admiral nice today?" Daniel looked toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the polished floor. "Yeah, sweetheart." She was. "Then you're friends now?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe we are." Ava beamed, then whispered as if sharing a secret. "She should come have pancakes with us sometime." Daniel chuckled. "You might get your wish." As they walked down the hall hand in hand, the base around them seemed brighter somehow. The storm clouds had lifted, but something new was forming, something warmer, quieter. A friendship born not of duty or rank, but of shared scars, forgiveness, and the quiet miracle of being seen again. And though neither of them could know it yet, that single cup of coffee would mark the beginning of everything that came after the redemption, the storm, and the moment the entire base would stand still. By the time Monday rolled around, the Norfolk base was buzzing with whispers. What had started as quiet gossip among the maintenance crew had rippled outward through every hallway, every mess table, and every locker room. "Did you hear the janitor used to be a Navy pilot? Not just a pilot, a hero. Huron Storm 2010. The guy pulled half a crew out of the ocean." "No way. That's urban legend stuff." Well, the Admiral seems to think otherwise. The stories multiplied like salt on the wind. Some said he'd single-handedly lifted a burning chopper. Others claimed he was part of a classified rescue team. One rumor even said the president had personally written his commendation. None of them knew the truth, but all of them agreed on one thing. No one looked at Daniel Cross the same way anymore. Daniel didn't care for the attention. He'd spent years building a quiet life, a world of clean floors, warm breakfasts, and bedtime stories for his daughter. He didn't want it to become a legend. Legends came with expectations, and expectations led back to the pain he'd fought so hard to bury. Still, when he entered the dining hall that morning with Ava in his arms, conversation stilled. Soldiers nodded respectfully. One young recruit even stood up and saluted. Daniel gave a polite nod and kept walking. Ava looked up, puzzled. "Daddy, why's everyone staring?" He smiled softly. "Maybe they just like your red boots," she giggled, satisfied with the explanation, and turned her attention back to her pancake. But the moment he sat down, a shadow fell across the table. He looked up to see Lieutenant Carter Admiral Drake's aide holding a tray and wearing an apologetic smile. "Mind if I join you, Sir Daniel?" almost laughed. "You don't have to call me Sir Lieutenant. I'm the guy who scrubs the floors you walk on." "Then I should probably be thanking you," Carter said, sliding into the seat opposite. "You've got half the base questioning what it means to serve. I think that's something we could all use." Daniel stirred his coffee. Rumors don't serve anyone, Lieutenant. They distract. Carter hesitated, then lowered his voice. Admiral Drake's trying to keep it contained. But you know how sailors are. Once a story gets out, it sails. Daniel finished with a faint grin. Yeah, I know the type. Before Carter could respond, Ava tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Daddy, can I show him my drawing? Carter leaned forward as she held up a fresh crayon picture. It showed Daniel holding hands with Amelia under a big blue sky, a small plane drawn above them. Is that us flying? Daniel asked gently. Ava nodded. That's you and the Admiral. She said you used to fly. I think you should again. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. Sweetheart, he said softly. Some things are meant to stay on the ground. Amelia Drake entered the hall just then, and the change in atmosphere was instant. Soldiers straightened, voices dropped. She carried herself with her usual command presence, but there was something new about her, a subtle warmth that hadn't been there before. When her eyes found Daniel, a small, almost private smile touched her lips. Good morning, Mr. Cross, she said as she approached. Morning, Admiral, he replied, standing out of habit. She gestured for him to sit. Please. I'm not here on business. Ava waved cheerfully. Hi, Admiral. Daddy says you're his friend. Amelia chuckled. Is that so? Well, that's one of the nicest titles I've ever had. The young sailors nearby tried not to stare, though their curiosity was palpable. Seeing the Admiral laughing with the janitor was something out of a fable. When Amelia left the hall a few minutes later, she paused at the door and addressed the group, her voice calm but firm. Before any more rumors spread, she said, I want to remind you all of something. Valor doesn't always wear stripes or medals. Sometimes it wears work boots and keeps this base running when no one's watching. She let that sink in. So if you see Mr. Cross, remember he's earned every ounce of respect you give him. And then some. The room fell silent. Then quietly, as if moved by something older than protocol, several soldiers stood and saluted. Daniel froze, stunned. Ava clapped happily, thinking it was some kind of game. They're saying hi to you, Daddy. He managed a smile and gave a small nod in return. Something like that, kiddo. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself outside by the maintenance dock, watching sunlight shimmer over the water. The sound of seagulls and the low hum of engines carried across the breeze. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of salt and jet fuel, a scent that once meant purpose. He didn't hear Amelia approach until she spoke. They needed to hear that. He opened his eyes. And you needed to say it. Maybe she admitted. But mostly, I needed them to understand something I forgot a long time ago, that dignity isn't a rank. Daniel gave a quiet nod. It's a hard lesson to teach from behind a desk. She smiled faintly. It's easier when someone else shows you how. They stood side by side in silence for a while, watching the reflection of the sky ripple on the water. Finally, Amelia said, I spoke with HQ this morning. Your service record's being reviewed for reinstatement. Not active duty, of course, advisory work. Training mentorship. It's entirely voluntary. Daniel turned to her, brow furrowed. You went through my file again. I went through our history, she corrected softly. You gave this uniform back its soul once. Maybe it's time it returned the favor. He looked out over the bay again. I appreciate the thought, Admiral, but I'm not sure I belong in that world anymore. Amelia studied him. Maybe not the way you used to, but I think the Navy could use a few men who understand humility. He laughed quietly. You always talk like you're still saving people. She met his eyes. Maybe I am. Something warm flickered in the space between them. Not quite friendship, not yet romance, but an understanding born from shared survival. Behind them, the low rumble of thunder echoed faintly over the horizon. Both turned toward the sound. "Storm coming," Daniel murmured. Amelia nodded, her gaze fixed on the clouds. "Feels like it." Neither of them knew that within 24 hours those clouds would turn real, and once again, Daniel Cross would be called to do what he was born for, to save lives when no one else could. For now, though, the base was still the air, heavy with the strange peace that always settles right before everything changes. The storm came faster than anyone expected. By late afternoon, the horizon had turned an angry slate gray, the wind rising off the Atlantic in violent gusts that rattled the hangar doors and sent tarps snapping across the airfield. The base, built to withstand hurricanes, and worse, moved with calm efficiency, alarms blaring, crews locking down equipment, commanders barking orders. For Admiral Amelia Drake, the sudden shift in weather brought back memories she'd spent years trying to forget: the smell of smoke in the cockpit, the radio crackling with the words, "We're going down." Storms had a way of resurrecting ghosts. She stood in the operations tower headset on scanning the radar as rain smeared the glass. "Status on the cargo hangar," she called. A voice crackled back. "Structural integrity compromised, ma'am. Gusts are hitting 70 knots. We've got 2 personnel unaccounted for near the maintenance bay." Her stomach tightened. Who Corporal Jensen and static drowned the rest technician Ruiz. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Get me a visual." The monitor flickered to life. Through the camera feed, the hangar roof could be seen buckling under the force of the wind. Metal sheets tore free and cartwheeled through the air like deadly leaves. Inside a forklift lay overturned crates spilled across the floor. 2 figures were indeed trapped under twisted steel. "God," she whispered. "That roof's going to go. Evac teams can't get close, Admiral," the officer said. "Wind shear's too strong." Amelia's jaw clenched. "We don't leave anyone behind." At that moment, across the compound, Daniel Cross was finishing his rounds near the auxiliary hangar. He'd felt the pressure change long before the first drops hit. Years in the sky had taught him how to read the air. The wind carried that low, deep hum that always preceded disaster. He tightened his jacket against the rain and glanced toward the horizon. The storm front looked wrong, angrier, denser than the reports predicted. Ava tugged at his hand. "Daddy, it's scary." He knelt to her level voice, calm. "It's just the wind, sweetheart. Go inside the office, okay? Stay with Mrs. Palmer until I come get you." She nodded reluctantly, hugging her teddy bear tight. "Promise you'll come back," he smiled softly. "Always." As she ran off toward safety, a loud crack split the air, a metallic shriek that made his blood run cold. He turned toward the main hangar just in time to see a section of the roof collapse in a burst of sparks. Without thinking, he was already running. By the time he reached the scene, chaos reigned. Rain lashed sideways. Sailors shouted over the roar of the wind. A forklift had crashed through a support beam, trapping 2 men under the debris. The air smelled of oil and ozone. "Get back," someone yelled. "It's too dangerous." Daniel ignored them. He scanned the damage, his eyes assessing, calculating the old pilot in him taking over. The roof was seconds from total failure. He shouted to the nearest sailor, "You find a jack or steel pipe, something to brace this section." The young man hesitated. "Sir, who are do it now?" Something in Daniel's voice cut through the noise. The sailor sprinted away. Daniel crouched beside the trapped men. Jensen's leg was pinned, blood mixing with the rainwater pooling on the floor. Ruiz was barely conscious. "You're gonna be all right," Daniel said evenly. "Just stay with me." He tried lifting the beam, it didn't budge. The wind screamed through the ruptured walls, each gust threatening to tear the entire structure apart. "Hang on," he muttered. Almost there. A second later, a voice cut through the storm. Cross. He turned. Admiral Drake was striding through the rain jacket, whipping in the wind, her white uniform soaked and streaked with mud. 2 emergency crew members followed close behind. "What the hell are you doing out here?" she shouted. "Saving your people," he shot back. Before she could reply, another piece of roofing tore loose and slammed into the floor beside them. The sound was deafening. Amelia ducked instinctively, then grabbed one of the rescue bars from her crew. "We'll brace from this side." On my mark, Daniel met her eyes. In that moment, there were no ranks, no titles, just 2 soldiers in the storm again. "Ready," he yelled. They lifted together, muscles straining, rain pouring into their eyes. The beam shifted an inch, then another. Jensen screamed as it moved off his leg. "Pull him out," Daniel barked. Amelia's crew dragged the injured man clear. The second victim was still pinned beneath a shattered crate. Daniel repositioned, wedging his shoulder under the debris. "Don't," Amelia began. He pushed with everything he had, the pain searing down his back, where the old injury flared. With a groan of protest, the steel gave way just enough for Ruiz to crawl free. The moment the men were clear, Daniel staggered back, his knees buckling. Amelia caught him before he hit the ground. "Easy," she said breathlessly. "You're hurt." He tried to wave her off. "I'm fine." Lightning flashed, illuminating their faces, her hair plastered to her forehead, his jaw clenched in pain, both of them soaked and shaking. Another boom of thunder rolled overhead, followed by the groaning collapse of a support beam. Amelia looked up just in time to see it falling straight toward them. Without hesitation, Daniel lunged, pulling her down, as the beam crashed inches away. The impact sent a shower of debris across the floor. When the noise finally subsided, Amelia realized she was still clutching his arm, her heart racing. His body shielded hers completely. "Daniel," she whispered. He looked at her, rain streaming down his face. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "You just saved me again." He smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. Hours later, when the storm finally broke, the base was a mess of puddles, twisted metal, and exhausted faces. Jensen and Ruiz were stabilized and transported to the infirmary. Daniel sat on the edge of an ambulance, bandage around his arm, the ache in his back pulsing with every breath. Amelia stood beside him, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Medical wants to keep you overnight," she said softly. "I'll be fine." She crossed her arms. "You nearly tore that shoulder apart." He shrugged. "It's held worse." For a moment she didn't speak. The sound of dripping water filled the silence. Finally she said, "You don't belong in the shadows, Daniel. Not anymore. The men saw what you did today. They'll never forget it." He looked out at the flooded runway, voice quiet. "I didn't do it for them. I did it because someone needed to. That's exactly why it matters." Their eyes met again, tired, honest, full of something unspoken. The base lights flickered back to life, casting a warm glow across the wreckage. It wasn't triumph, but it was survival. And as the last of the rain faded into the sea, Amelia realized something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Admiration that went deeper than respect, something like faith. She turned to him. "Don't disappear on me this time, Daniel." He smiled faintly. "I'll try not to, Admiral." But deep down, both of them knew that storms, whether in the sky or the heart, had a way of returning. And sometimes they brought the light with them. The sun returned the next morning, as if the storm had never existed. The air over Norfolk carried that sharp, clean scent that follows chaos, the kind that tastes like second chances. The base was alive again, crews assessing the damage mechanics, checking aircraft laughter echoing between hangars, as if laughter itself was proof they'd survived. In the mess hall, stories spread faster than the steam from the coffee urns. "He went in alone," someone said. "Dragged them out before the roof came down. The Admiral herself was there. He saved her life again." By noon, the whispers had a name. the janitor who saved the Admiral. Daniel Cross wanted none of it. He was back in the maintenance wing, sleeves rolled mop in hand, as if nothing had changed. The bandage around his arm was a minor inconvenience. Pain was familiar. It didn't bother him half as much as attention did. Daddy Ava said from her corner coloring with intense focus. The lady at the cafeteria said, "You're a hero." Daniel smiled faintly, wringing out the mop. People say a lot of things when they don't have to mop floors. But she said, "Everyone clapped for you." Ava looked up, eyes wide. Even the Admiral, he paused mid-motion, glancing toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the polished tile. "Yeah, well," he said quietly, "the Admiral's a kind woman. She knows when someone needs encouragement." Ava nodded solemnly, then added, "I think you're brave." Daniel set the mop aside and crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Sweetheart bravery isn't about running into storms. It's about standing still when people need you. Her eyes brightened, like you did for them. He sighed softly, realizing he'd lost this round. Something like that. Across the base, Admiral Amelia Drake stood at the podium of the assembly hall, her white uniform crisp again, though her right wrist bore a small bruise from the debris that had nearly taken her life. Rows of sailors' officers and maintenance staff filled the room. The air buzzed with quiet expectation. She'd insisted on calling the meeting herself. HQ had already sent commendations for her quick action during the storm, but she knew better. The real story didn't belong to her. She adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm, yet warm. "Yesterday, this base faced one of the worst squalls we've seen in years. We lost no lives. That's something worth remembering and thanking." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, but she continued that outcome didn't happen because of luck. It happened because one man refused to stand by while others were in danger. One man who acted when it mattered most. Her gaze swept the crowd until it found him standing awkwardly near the back in his green fatigues. Sleeves rolled a mop, still leaning against the wall beside him. Daniel froze. Ava perched on a folding chair next to him, grinned proudly. "Mr. Daniel Cross," Amelia said, her tone softening. "Please come forward." A low hum went through the audience. Daniel shook his head, whispering, "No, no, no." But Ava was already tugging at his hand. "Daddy, she's calling you." Reluctantly, he walked to the front, the sound of his boots echoing in the hush that fell over the room. Amelia stepped aside as he reached the podium, her eyes shining with quiet pride. "I don't know what to say," Daniel murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Then let me say it for you," Amelia replied. She turned to the crowd. "Yesterday, under conditions that would have stopped most men in their tracks, this man went into a collapsing hangar to save 2 of our own. Without equipment. Without backup. He didn't hesitate, not because he was ordered to, but because that's who he is." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "Some of you may know that Mr. Cross once served as lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. What you might not know is that he was awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during Operation Huron Storm. Many of us, including me, owe our lives to what he did that day." The silence was absolute. Only the sound of flags rustling faintly at the back of the hall broke it. She turned toward him. "Daniel, I can't undo the years the Navy forgot to honor you properly. But today, in front of everyone here, I want to make one thing clear. You never stopped serving. You just found another way to do it." She reached for the small velvet box on the podium and opened it. Inside gleamed the silver and blue ribbon of the Navy Cross, his medal freshly cleaned, the same one that had once been hidden away in a shoebox. Daniel stared at it, speechless. "Admiral," his voice cracked. "That belongs to another life." Amelia smiled faintly. "Then let this moment be about this one. She stepped closer, pinning the medal to his chest. For courage beyond duty, and for reminding us all that honor doesn't fade, even when the uniform does. The hall erupted in applause. Some clapped politely. Others stood. A few saluted outright. But it was Ava's voice, clear and bright, that rose above them all. "That's my dad." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. He looked down at her, his little girl, her face glowing with pride. And for the first time in years, the ache in his chest eased. Amelia leaned close and whispered, "Looks like you've still got a fan club." He chuckled quietly, eyes glistening. "Yeah, the only one that ever mattered." Later that evening, long after the crowd had dispersed, Daniel found himself alone in the janitor's closet, the place that had been his quiet refuge for years. The smell of lemon cleaner and old pine filled the air. The medal still hung against his chest, heavy and strange. He took it off and set it on a shelf beside the mop bucket. For a long moment he just looked at it, the polished silver catching the faint light from the doorway. Ava appeared behind him barefoot, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you coming to bed?" "In a minute, kiddo." She noticed the medal and smiled. "Are you going to wear it forever?" He shook his head. "No, sweetheart. It's not about wearing it. It's about remembering what it means." "What does it mean?" He crouched beside her, pulling her close. "That doing the right thing doesn't stop when people stop watching." Ava thought about it, then nodded. "Like when I share my cookies, even if nobody says thank you." He laughed softly. "Exactly like that." She hugged him tightly. "You're still my hero." He held her close, the medal glinting in the dim light, and whispered, "You're mine too." In the silence that followed, Daniel realized something profound. Honor wasn't a ceremony, or a medal, or applause. It was this, a quiet room, a little girl safe in his arms, and the knowledge that he'd kept every promise that ever mattered. Behind them, in the mop closet that smelled of soap and lemon, the Navy Cross caught one last glimmer of light, its reflection soft and steady like the man who'd finally made peace with the storms. The dawn broke quiet over Norfolk Harbor, the kind of morning that looked washed clean after a storm. The sky stretched pale gold over the base, and the flag atop the main mast stirred lazily in the breeze, its rippling sound like a heartbeat restored. Daniel Cross stood at the pier with a thermos of coffee in his hand, the Navy Cross medal tucked neatly inside his pocket. He hadn't worn it since the ceremony, not because he didn't value it, but because its weight belonged to yesterday. Today was about something else entirely. Behind him, Ava ran along the dock, her laughter ringing bright against the calm of the sea. "Daddy, look, the water's sparkling." He turned, smiling. "Careful near the edge, Captain." She saluted dramatically, then pointed toward the horizon. "That cloud looks like your helicopter." Daniel followed her gaze. The cloud did look a little like the rescue chopper from years past, its shape caught in the light. For a moment he could almost hear the hum of the blade, smell the salt and smoke. He closed his eyes and let the memory drift away, carried off on the morning wind. "Morning, Daniel." The voice was soft, familiar. He turned to see Admiral Amelia Drake approaching her white uniform replaced by a casual navy blue jacket. She carried 2 cups of coffee, steam curling upward. "You're up early," he said. "I could say the same," she replied, handing him a cup. "Though I had a feeling I'd find you here." He smiled faintly. "Still keeping tabs on your janitor." She arched an eyebrow. "Former janitor. You've been reassigned, remember?" Daniel chuckled. "Maintenance advisor isn't exactly a promotion, Admiral." Amelia leaned on the railing beside him. "Maybe not by pay grade. But after what you've done here, you could teach half my officers a thing or two about integrity." He looked out at the water again. "You're giving me too much credit." She shook her head. "No, I'm just giving it where it's due." They stood in silence for a while, watching sunlight catch the surface of the bay. Around them, the base stirred to life engines, warming flags being raised, sailors shouting morning drills. The sound carried an energy neither of them had felt. In a long time, something lighter, almost hopeful. Amelia finally spoke. "You know, there's something ironic about all this. I spent most of my career believing strength came from order, rules, command discipline. But you," she turned toward him, "you reminded me that strength can also look like kindness, like quiet." He met her gaze, eyes steady. "Kindness isn't weakness, Admiral. It's endurance." A faint smile touched her lips. "You make it sound poetic." He shrugged. "Maybe I've been around your speeches too long." For a moment, they simply stood there, two people bound by storms, past and present no longer by rank, but by recognition. Ava came skipping up, holding a small folded paper flag she'd made from a napkin and a straw. "Look, I made us our own Navy flag." Amelia crouched down, taking it carefully from her hands. "That's beautiful, Ava." "What's it for?" "For Daddy's promise," the girl said matter-of-factly. "He said heroes keep promises." Amelia looked up at Daniel. "What promise is that?" Daniel smiled softly. "To never stop trying to make the world a little better than I found it." Ava grinned. "And to take me for pancakes," after they all laughed, the sound warm against the sea breeze. Later that morning, the base gathered for the official commendation photo, a ceremony Amelia had insisted on, but kept deliberately simple. There were no speeches, no fanfare, just a few words, and the raising of the flag in honor of those who'd faced the storm and held fast. Daniel stood off to the side, not in front, his hands tucked in his pockets. He preferred it that way. Watching from a distance suited him fine. Amelia approached quietly. "You're supposed to be in the front row," he smiled. "That spot's for leaders." "You are one," she said. He gave a small shake of his head. "Not the kind that gives orders?" "No," she agreed softly. "The kind that gives people hope." He looked at her, surprised by the tenderness in her tone. She smiled, gentle, unguarded. For a moment he saw not the Admiral, not the officer, but the woman who had stood beside him in the rain, unafraid to fight and unafraid to feel. The photographer called for attention. Amelia straightened, but before stepping away she said quietly, "Don't disappear again, Daniel. Not from this base, not from me." He held her gaze. "I wasn't planning to." That evening the sun dipped low behind the docks, bathing the entire harbor in amber light. The day's bustle had quieted, and only a handful of figures lingered on the pier. Daniel, Amelia, and Ava sat together on an old bench overlooking the water. Ava leaned her head on her father's shoulder, fighting sleep. Amelia watched the girl's slow breathing, the tiny smile still lingering on her lips, and whispered, "She adores you." "She's my compass," Daniel said. "Every storm I've survived led me back to her." Amelia nodded, her eyes soft. "You know, I used to think healing was about forgetting, but maybe it's about remembering just differently." Daniel looked at her. "Maybe it's about who you remember it with." A comfortable silence fell between them. The flag at the end of the pier fluttered gently in the evening breeze, its reflection shimmering across the water. Amelia turned to him. "You ever think about flying again?" He smiled faintly. "Not the way I used to, but sometimes when the wind's just right, it feels like I already am." She studied his face in the fading light. There was peace there, now. Real peace. The kind born of forgiveness, not forgetting. As the last rays of sun touched the water, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the Navy Cross. For a long moment he just held it, feeling its cool weight in his palm. Then he set it gently on the bench between them. Amelia frowned. "You're leaving it here?" He shook his head. No. I'm giving it to someone who'll make sure it means something. Before she could ask, he handed it to Oiva, who blinked sleepily and took it with both hands. Daddy. What's this for? She asked. For you, he said softly. So you remember that bravery isn't about medals, it's about keeping your heart open even when it's hard. Ava hugged the medal to her chest. I'll take care of it. I know you will. As the evening deepened into twilight, Amelia reached for Daniel's hand. He didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if this had been waiting to happen all along. Maybe, she whispered, the storm didn't just bring destruction. Maybe it brought us exactly where we were supposed to be. Daniel looked out at the horizon, where the last light met the endless blue. Maybe it did. The flag above them rippled once more, catching the dying sun in its folds. Ava leaned against them, half asleep, the Navy Cross resting in her small hands. And as the waves lapped softly against the pier, Daniel Cross, the quiet hero, the janitor, the pilot who once vanished into the storm, finally found what he hadn't even known he was searching for. Not glory, not redemption, but home. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the coast, the countryside, or somewhere quiet that reminds you of home? Share it in the comments below. It's always a joy to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more tales of kindness, courage, and the quiet heroes who walk among us. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. Until next time, may your days be gentle, your heart steady, and your spirit always brave.